Previously, I did a video about Singapore's attempts to maintain their native population through the use of pro-natal financial incentives and policies. I also covered China's population control policies coming up to its momentous one-child policy. Today we're going to look at Taiwan's situation and their own low fertility issues. Ultra-low natural fertility is a challenge that each of the developed East Asian nations are struggling with. Why is this happening? What policies can governments enact to reverse this trend? What is it saying about people's general preferences? We're going to try to grapple with this issue in today's video. Despite writing so much, I feel like I have just only scratched the surface. But hope you can enjoy. But first, let's talk about the Patreon. Yes, I have a Patreon now. Ad income is always volatile, but coffee always costs the same. I make videos pretty far ahead of the schedule, but they're queued up in YouTube waiting to be released. The early access tier lets you watch all of those videos right now ahead of time, including this one. The number of videos will fluctuate, but right now it's at 10, and you'll get to see new videos literally as I make and post them. So head on over to the Patreon page and take a look. I deeply appreciate anything you'd be able to sign up for. Thanks, and on with the show. Taiwan's 2018 total fertility rate is about 1.06. South Korea's is 0.98, Singapore's 1.14, and Hong Kong's 1.07. Each of the four Asian tigers regularly trade off the last place spot from year to year. Taiwan's experience of the demographic shift is relatively normal and follows that of its economic peers. Entering the 20th century, people had large families. Many children died early, so mortality was high. New public measures introduced in the early 20s, clean drinking water, sewage, sanitation, etc., caused the population mortality rate to plunge. Yet at the same time, families stayed large, and this caused a population boom. But over the decades, family sizes declined, and there are a number of reasons for this. First, people got richer. In 1951, GDP per capita was just 146 US dollars. By 1984, it reached 3,199, and as of 2018, it is 24,970. Secondly, women's labor participation rates in education steadily rose. As that happened, the societal demand for children naturally declined over the years. Family planning surveys taken since the 1960s have found the preferred number of children declining from 4.0 to 2.6 in 1985 and 2.0 in 2002. Third, but less significantly, the Taiwan government launched a family planning program in 1965. Begun in Taichung, the IUD insertion program appeared to have targeted women who already have had children and did not want any more. This program was on a rather small scale and did not appear to have been forced. There has been debate about the program's overall effectiveness, but we can all agree that it accelerated the fertility trends that had already begun a decade earlier. So up until now, we've seen this story already many times in developing countries around the world. You have a government that at first encourages family planning and population control during the years when the population is booming, then they realize that the programs have done a little too well and reverse course. The Taiwan government made their own first moves towards a more pro-natal policy in 1992. Since 1984, the net reproduction rate has been below the replacement level. If the downward trend continues, the population of Taiwan area will reach the stage of zero population growth soon and turn into a negative growth quickly. Therefore, the future policy should promote a reasonable growth of the population. Despite this declaration, the Taiwan government did not implement any new policies right then. Rather, they repealed a birth subsidy for government employees. The majority of the scope was focused on increasing the rates of marriage within society. In general, the government believed then that the limiting of family sizes was a societal net benefit. At the time, the total fertility rate per woman was hovering about 1.8 to 2, which was a hair below the 2.1 needed to maintain the current population size. Policymakers believed that more of a tweak was needed than a drastic overhaul. But fertility rates continued to plunge to its current ultra-low levels as the country entered the new millennium. Issues relating to population aging began to gain traction in the media. The government realized that it should do more to prevent an aging crisis. In 2006, the Taiwan government revised its policies to incorporate additional voices from Taiwan society, including that of mothers and caretakers. Many of these measures are things that make sense and have been implemented in other countries to varying amounts of success. The issue is turning a pledge into action. First, let's talk finances. The Taiwan government pledged to go further in supporting the cost of raising a child. In 2002, the government shared just 24% of the cost of raising one preschool-aged child, 35% for a family with two such children. The support would come in the form of housing loan interest subsidies and income tax reductions. Contrast with Japan, where the government shared 52% of the total cost of raising a child to the age of 18, which I think is pretty staggering. Next, childcare, ameliorating the time and effort burden of childcare. Taiwan pledged to build a more comprehensive public childcare system so that parents can have affordable, sufficient, and high-quality childcare while they go to work. The results on that are pending. Making paternal and maternity leave more realistic and achievable. The 2002 Equal Employment Act mandated a maximum of 2 years of parental leave for workers, but few outside the government sector took it. Private employers also rebelled. The government reformed the 2002 law so that employers better know what they're expected to offer in terms of leave, and then extended it to cover small businesses. Since small businesses employ the majority of Taiwanese, this is a big deal. Measures were also proposed to try to influence the social stigmas and difficulties around childbearing. New protections were extended to smaller employers in order to get them to offer better child care services for their pregnant workers. Health education curriculums were reformed so that couples can better understand and plan out their families. Lastly, measures were undertaken to explicitly encourage marriage, namely, to improve the societal and financial opportunities for marriage. These moves are in line with similar reforms passed in Japan. Why would policy focus on marriage? I want to briefly discuss this because it confused me too at first. The reason is that in East Asia, childbirth almost always happens within the context of marriage. This is especially the case if the country culture is identified as being Confucian or Confucian influenced. Very rarely do we see births out of wedlock. Recent statistics show that the share of non-marital births in Taiwan is 4%, as compared to 1.5% in South Korea and 2% in Japan. Europe, for their part, underwent the demographic transition as early as the 1970s, but similar declines in European birth rates by married couples have been slightly ameliorated by births out of wedlock, by cohabiting couples or single parents. That has not happened in Taiwan nor other parts of East Asia, likely due to a lack of acceptance by society. So basically, as a result, marriage rates foretell childbirth rates. Policymakers have taken it to be that if people get married, they are likely to soon have children. It's a leading indicator. So rising singlehood rates in Taiwan have been a real concern. And yes, we're taking into account cohabitation rates as well. The percentage of men and women at the age of 50 who never marry have risen throughout the years. Again, a trend across multiple Asian countries. And for those who do marry, they're doing so at a later age. The average age for a woman's first marriage in Taiwan as of 2015 is 30. People have given all sorts of reasons for this. There are entire theses done on it. But we're not going to go into that as it is out of the scope of this specific video. But I found it unique enough to mention. Regardless, the Taiwanese government has been mostly hands-off with regard to this issue. And I don't blame them because I have no ideas either. I would be remiss if I were to do a video about childbearing preferences and not mention many of the other reasons cited for why couples aren't birthing kiddos. So, let's quickly go through some other major factors through the context of Taiwan. First, housing is too expensive. House prices are rising everywhere in Taiwan, but Taipei especially. The cost of one house is right now many times the average Taiwanese salary. And people love complaining about it. It's basically a national sport by now. Often, family contributes to the down payment, but for those without well-off parents, that is not possible. And those houses are shoeboxes, limiting the size of the household. Second, Taiwan needs to address the issue of women's labor participation rates. Higher participation rates mean delayed marriages, and Taiwan has some of the highest female labor participation rates at all ages. Women are more educated and earning more than ever, which is great, but policy should change so that women don't have to choose between family and work. For this, Taiwan has promoted technologies to accommodate women giving birth at a later age, freezing eggs, health checks, and the like. I've started to see this trend appear in America too. Another issue, Taiwan is a Confucianist society, and that means women have to deal with the difficulties of the traditional patriarchal family. Many married men still don't shoulder their share of household chores and childcare responsibilities. Women end up picking up the slack and end up having to do both their work and household duties. As of 2006, men spend half of an hour a day on family matters, as compared to women's 2.4 hours. Oh, and then there's the parental in-laws. A wife whose mother-in-law does not like her is very soon an unhappy wife. Furthermore, many newlyweds still live with their parents, though I was not able to find recent statistics. The latest I have come from the year 1985, showing that 67% of couples live in their parents' home, down from 1958's 92%. So I think that's a good trend. Related to all the above is the general persistent unfriendliness of Taiwanese employers to pregnant women and working mothers. I mentioned the government's pledge to promote new measures for working mothers. They need to do a better job of applying these to small and medium-sized businesses, where enforcement has been spotty. Another factor has to do with the worsening education arms race in Taiwan. It's not as bad as South Korea yet, but children and parents find themselves forced into increasing cycles of education credentialism. The existence of cram schools, where Taiwanese kids are grinding their way through books late into the night, has lasting effects on both parent and child. We also have to mention general uncertainty about the economic situation. For single Taiwanese men especially, economic instability is the biggest reason why they are not yet comfortable to marry and thus reproduce. 41.6% of unmarried men and 22.6% of women say it is because they are in an unstable economic situation. I've done a video about Taiwan's persistent low-wage issues that I think you might be interested in. All of this should be of no surprise to you. You will find similar answers if you ask young Americans. And that makes sense, because this is a global issue. East Asia's pro-natal policies have largely failed to do what they've set out to do. Governments have enacted creative and far-reaching policies to try to incentivize more babies, some more than others. But the prevalent theme remains that none of it has really worked, and Taiwan is no exception. Now, you can argue that these policies still fall far short in magnitude at actually fixing the problem at hand, and that's definitely a valid argument. Singapore, for instance, has arguably gone further than any other country in providing financial support, but even with that, families still have to share over 60% of the childcare burden, more when you count college tuition, bane of any American parent. Furthermore, in the specific case of Taiwan, the government has done less than Japan or Singapore, for example, in implementing pro-natal policies, the bare minimum, so to say. But there can also be something else, and bear with me here for a bit. In a place like Singapore or China, where a governing party can simply decide things, the government could announce a policy change and pivot accordingly. For instance, when the Singapore government failed to raise its natural birth rate, it began promoting immigration as the alternative. But when Taiwan faced a similar situation in the 1990s, it had already by then transitioned to being a vibrant democracy. That meant a public debate about the merits and drawbacks of pro-natal policies. And suddenly became that, when a government official started talking about aging population and demographic transition, ordinary people replied back with overcrowding and better quality of life. This popular discomfort has contributed to the general slowness in policy response by the Taiwanese government. And that makes me wonder. Perhaps this persistent low fertility is a sign that government policymakers and their governing populations are not aligned in their goals. Maybe people just don't want as much children and people in their country as governments want. I'll end with this. A child is a responsibility, and to be forced into raising one leads to a disastrous situation for both parent and child. Governments implementing pro-natal policies want ever-growing populations and productive, wealthy workers to tax. Is that what a mother or father gets up in the morning for? So I'll leave you that to think about. All right, you guys, take care of yourselves. Stay safe out there. If you want to support the Asianometry channel, make sure to like and subscribe. I have a lot more content on this coming out soon. So take care of yourselves. See you soon.